Year 1200 BC, the Sinai Desert burns under an unrelenting sun as an entire people marches toward their destiny. During 40 years, 12 tribes have wandered these endless sands, carrying with them something no other ancient people possesses: the promise of a God who claims to be unique, absolute, unmatched in the heavens or on earth. But that promise demands a price, and that price is total obedience. If this epic tale of faith, rebellion, and divine promise captivates you, hit that subscribe button now to join our community and never miss an episode. Let's dive deeper into history together. The story we're about to tell doesn't begin here, in these scorched dunes. Its roots sink much deeper into time, into the legends of three patriarchs whose faith would change the course of Western civilization: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Names that would echo through millennia, transforming into pillars of three great religions that would shape the world to our days. According to the Hebrew scriptures, Abraham received a divine call that would alter his existence forever. He had to leave Ur of the Chaldeans, the most prosperous city in Mesopotamia, and walk toward an unknown land that Yahweh would show him. It wasn't a simple trade journey or a migration forced by famine or war. It was something radically different, an act of pure faith based solely on the word of a deity who promised to turn his descendants into a nation as numerous as the stars in the sky. The promise passed from generation to generation. Isaac, the miraculous son born when Sarah had already passed childbearing age, inherited that divine covenant. Then came Jacob, who, after wrestling all night with a celestial being, received a new name: Israel, meaning he who struggles with God. His 12 sons would become the ancestors of the 12 tribes that would define this people's identity for centuries to come. But then something happened that seemed to contradict all those divine promises. A devastating famine forced Jacob's family to descend to Egypt, where Joseph, the son sold as a slave by his own brothers, had become the second most powerful man in the Pharaonic Empire. What began as a temporary refuge turned into a permanent stay. Generations passed, the Israelites multiplied, and a new Pharaoh, who knew nothing of Joseph, nor remembered the services he had rendered to Egypt, decided that these foreigners posed a threat. The slavery that followed lasted entire generations. The children of Israel built the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses, molding bricks under the Egyptian whip, while their backs broke and their hopes faded. Where was that God who had promised greatness to Abraham? Why did he allow his chosen people to suffer such humiliation? The answer would come in the form of a man with a complicated past: Moses, a Hebrew raised as an Egyptian prince, a fugitive who had spent decades herding sheep in the desert of Midian. When the burning bush spoke to him on the slopes of Mount Horeb, Moses resisted. He argued, he sought excuses, but he finally accepted his mission: return to Egypt and demand that the Pharaoh free the Hebrew slaves. What followed were the 10 plagues that, according to the biblical account, devastated the land of Egypt. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs invaded the palaces. Lice covered men and animals. Flies darkened the sky. Pestilence wiped out the livestock. Boils tormented the Egyptians' skin. Hail destroyed the crops. Locusts devoured what remained. Darkness plunged the country into absolute obscurity for 3 days. And finally, the 10th plague, the death of all Egyptian firstborns in a single night. That night, as cries of pain echoed in every Egyptian home, the Israelites marked their doors with lamb's blood and ate standing, with loins girded and staff in hand, ready to depart. It was the first Passover, a festival their descendants would celebrate for over 3,000 years, remembering that night when death passed over their houses and freedom became possible. The exodus began amid chaos. 600,000 men on foot, according to the biblical text, not counting women and children, a multitude advancing eastward, carrying all they could. But the Pharaoh soon regretted letting them go. His army pursued them until catching up by the Red Sea, where the waters miraculously parted, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground, only to close over the Egyptian chariots that tried to follow. However, the newly won freedom did not mean the end of trials. On Mount Sinai, amid thunder and lightning shaking the mountain, Moses received the tablets of the law, 10 commandments engraved in stone that would establish the ethical and religious foundations of the people of Israel. You shall not worship other gods. You shall not make carved images. You shall not take the name of God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not take life. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet. These principles, along with the complex ritual, civil, and ceremonial laws that accompanied them, transformed that mass of freed slaves into something entirely new. A people with a distinctive religious identity, bound by a solemn covenant with a deity that demanded absolute exclusivity in worship and unconditional obedience to its statutes. But here, in the desert, something went terribly wrong. While Moses remained on the summit of Sinai receiving the Torah, the people waiting at the mountain's base grew impatient. Under the direction of Aaron, Moses' brother, they melted their gold jewelry and created a calf, proclaiming it as the god that had brought them out of Egypt. When Moses descended and beheld the idolatrous orgy unfolding before the idol, his anger was so intense that he hurled the tablets to the ground, shattering them. What followed was a terrible judgment. The Levites, Moses' tribe, swept through the camp with their swords, and about 3,000 men perished that day. It was a brutal warning about what would happen whenever Israel abandoned Yahweh for other gods. A warning that, as we shall see, the people would ignore time and again throughout their history. The punishment for that rebellion was condemnation to wander 40 years in the desert, until the entire generation that had left Egypt perished, except Joshua and Caleb, the only spies who had trusted that Yahweh would give them victory over the inhabitants of Canaan. 40 years of circular marching, of miraculous provisions of manna every morning, of water springing from rocks, of constant complaints and repeated rebellions punished with severity. Moses himself would not enter the promised land. After leading the people for 4 decades, after enduring their constant murmurings, after interceding countless times before Yahweh to save them from the destruction they deserved, the great liberator could only gaze upon Canaan from the top of Mount Nebo before dying on the plains of Moab. Leadership passed to Joshua, an experienced warrior who had served as Moses' assistant since his youth. Around the year 1200 BC, the tribes of Israel finally crossed the Jordan River. The waters miraculously stopped, allowing them to pass on dry ground, a repetition of the Red Sea prodigy that marked the start of a new era. The first city they faced was Jericho, with its formidable walls that seemed impregnable to a people lacking sophisticated siege machinery. But according to the biblical account, Jericho did not fall by conventional military force. For 6 days, the Israelites marched silently around the city, carrying the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day, they circled 7 times. The priests blew their ram's horns, the people shouted in unison, and the walls collapsed. The city was taken, and everything in it was devoted to total destruction, except Rahab, the prostitute, and her family, who had helped the Israelite spies. The conquest of Canaan was neither quick nor complete. Joshua achieved significant victories, defeating coalitions of Canaanite kings in battles like Gibeon, where according to the scriptures, the sun stood still in the sky, to give Israel more time to pursue their enemies. The cities of Ai, Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir fell to the Israelite advance. The territory was divided among the 12 tribes by lot, establishing the borders that would define Israel's regional identity for centuries. However, large swaths of Canaan remained unconquered. The Philistines controlled the coastal plain with their 5 main cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. The Phoenicians dominated the north. The Canaanites retained strategic strongholds in the interior. And most troubling of all, many Israelite tribes did not completely expel the original inhabitants from their assigned territories, but made coexistence agreements that would prove fatal to their religious fidelity. Joshua died at the age of 110, and with his death began one of the most chaotic and fascinating periods in Israelite history, the era of the Judges. For approximately 2 centuries, from 1200 to 1050 BC, Israel existed without central government, without a king, without a capital, without state bureaucracy. It was a loose tribal confederation, theoretically united by their common faith in Yahweh and their commitment to Moses' Torah. But the reality on the ground was much more complex and dark. The book of Judges sums it up with a chilling phrase that repeats like a refrain. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The absence of central authority produced moral and religious anarchy. The Israelites married Canaanites, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, and Sidonians. They worshipped Baal and Asherah, the Canaanite fertility deities. They established pagan high places. They participated in rituals that included sacred prostitution. The pattern that developed was sadly predictable. Israel abandoned Yahweh and served the local gods. As a consequence, Yahweh allowed some neighboring nation to oppress them. The Israelites cried out for deliverance. Yahweh raised up a judge, a charismatic leader endowed with his spirit, who defeated the oppressors and ruled Israel for a time. But when that judge died, the people returned to idolatry, starting the cycle anew. The judges were extraordinary and often contradictory figures. Othniel defeated the Mesopotamians. Ehud, a left-handed warrior, assassinated the obese Moabite king Eglon by plunging a sword into his belly. Deborah, one of the few female leaders in the ancient Middle East, along with General Barak, defeated the Canaanite army of Jabin, whose commander Sisera was later eliminated by Jael, who drove a tent peg into his temple while he slept. Gideon began his career by destroying his own father's altar to Baal. With only 300 men armed with torches, pitchers, and trumpets, he defeated the Midianites oppressing Israel. However, later he created a golden ephod that became an object of idolatrous worship for the Israelites. His son Abimelech tried to establish a monarchy by murdering 70 of his brothers, only to die when a woman dropped a millstone on his head during a city siege. Jephthah made a rash vow that resulted in the sacrifice of his own daughter. Samson, the Nazarite endowed with supernatural strength, spent his life in a self-destructive spiral of personal vendettas against the Philistines, motivated more by his passions than by responsible leadership, until finally, blind and chained, he pulled down the temple of Dagon on the Philistines and himself. The final stories in the book of Judges show how far Israel had fallen into moral anarchy. The tribe of Dan migrated north, stealing idols along the way and establishing their own irregular priesthood. A Levite whose concubine was raped and murdered by men from the tribe of Benjamin cut her body into 12 pieces and sent them to all the tribes of Israel. The civil war that followed nearly exterminated the tribe of Benjamin entirely. This unsustainable chaos created the conditions for a radical political transformation. The Israelite tribes faced a growing existential threat. The Philistines, a sea people of probable Aegean origin who had settled on the southern coast of Canaan. The Philistines possessed a devastating technological advantage, the iron monopoly. While the Israelites still used bronze weapons, the Philistines wielded iron swords and spears that could cut through bronze like clay. Defeats piled up. The Philistines penetrated deeper into Israelite territory. In a catastrophic battle near Aphek, they captured the Ark of the Covenant, the supreme symbol of Yahweh's presence among his people. The elderly priest Eli died from the shock upon hearing the news. His daughter-in-law, giving birth amid the tragedy, named the child Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed because the Ark of God had been captured. Although the Ark was eventually returned after causing plagues among the Philistines, the message was clear. Israel needed a fundamental change in its political structure if it wanted to survive. The elders of Israel gathered and approached the prophet Samuel, the last and greatest of the judges, with a revolutionary demand. Give us a king to govern us like all the nations. Samuel was deeply disturbed by the request. He consulted Yahweh, who responded with bitter words. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from reigning over them. Yahweh warned through Samuel about the consequences of having a king. He would take their sons for his army and chariots. He would take their daughters to cook and bake. He would take their best fields, vineyards, and olive groves. He would take 1/10 of their grain and flocks. He would turn them into servants. And when they finally cried out for deliverance from that king they had demanded, Yahweh would not answer them. But the people insisted. They wanted a king like the other nations, someone to govern them and go out before them to fight their battles. Samuel, reluctantly, agreed to seek the man Yahweh had chosen for this new era. That man turned out to be Saul, son of Kish, from the tribe of Benjamin. The scriptures describe him as an impressive man, taller than any other Israelite, of imposing appearance. When Samuel secretly anointed him around 1050 BC, Saul experienced a spiritual transformation, prophesying among the prophets, receiving another heart from Yahweh. His public presentation was dramatic. When the time came to reveal him to the people, Saul had hidden among the baggage. He had to be dragged from his hiding place to be proclaimed king before all Israel. His first test as monarch came quickly, when Nahash the Ammonite besieged the city of Jabesh Gilead and offered surrender only if he gouged out the right eye of every inhabitant. When Saul heard this threat, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him. He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent them throughout Israel with the message, "This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel into battle." The people responded massively. Saul organized the army into 3 columns that attacked the Ammonite camp at dawn, scattering them completely. The victory consolidated his monarchy. However, the relationship between Saul and Samuel soon deteriorated. On 2 critical occasions, Saul disobeyed specific divine orders. First, he offered a burnt offering himself when Samuel was delayed before a battle against the Philistines, usurping priestly functions. Then, in the war against the Amalekites, he spared King Agag and kept the best livestock when he had been ordered to destroy everything completely. Samuel confronted Saul with words that would echo through history. Does Yahweh delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying his word? Obedience is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he has rejected you as king. The divine verdict had fallen. Saul would continue reigning for years, but he was already doomed. Samuel secretly anointed a new king, a young shepherd from Bethlehem named David, the youngest of Jesse's 8 sons. When Samuel saw David's older brothers, impressive in appearance, he thought surely one of them was the chosen one. But Yahweh told him, "Man looks at the outward appearance, but Yahweh looks at the heart." David entered Saul's court as a musician, playing the harp to soothe the king's tormented spirit. But it was his victory over Goliath that catapulted him to national fame. When the Philistines challenged Israel to single combat, offering their champion Goliath of Gath, a giant over 9 feet tall, clad in bronze armor weighing over 125 pounds, no one in the Israelite army dared face him. For 40 days, morning and evening, Goliath presented himself before the Israelite battle lines, mocking them and defying them. David, who had arrived at the camp to bring provisions to his brothers, heard the challenge and was outraged. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine to defy the armies of the living God?" he asked. Saul tried to clothe David in his own armor, but the young shepherd rejected it, unused to it. Instead, he took his staff, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and advanced toward Goliath with his sling. The giant mocked him. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" David replied with words that have been repeated for millennia. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of Yahweh Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The stone flew from David's sling, sank into Goliath's forehead, and the giant fell face down on the ground. David ran, took the Philistine's sword, and cut off his head. The Philistines fled in panic, pursued by the Israelites who slaughtered them to the gates of Gath and Ekron. The victory transformed David into a national hero. Women came out singing and dancing. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Those words poisoned Saul's heart with deadly jealousy. The king spent the following years trying to eliminate David, hurling spears at him while he played the harp, sending him on suicidal military missions, pursuing him through the desert with 3,000 chosen men. On 2 occasions, David had the perfect opportunity to eliminate Saul. Once he found him sleeping in a cave. Another time he sneaked into his camp at night and found him asleep, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. Both times, David's men urged him to kill him. Both times, David refused. "I will not lay my hand on the Lord's anointed." He cut a piece of Saul's robe or took his spear and water jug, simply to prove he could have killed him, but chose not to. Saul's tragedy reached its climax on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines invaded in great numbers, and Israel's army was shattered. Saul's 3 sons, including Jonathan, David's best friend, perished in the battle. Saul, severely wounded by Philistine archers, fell on his own sword to avoid the humiliation of being captured alive. The Philistines found his body, cut off his head, stripped his armor, and nailed his corpse to the walls of Beth-shan. When David received the news, he tore his clothes and composed a funeral lament of extraordinary beauty. "How the mighty have fallen! The weapons of war have perished." Despite all the years of persecution, David genuinely mourned Saul and especially Jonathan. "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women." Saul's death opened the way for David to assume the throne, but not without complications. The southern tribes anointed him king in Hebron, but the northern ones followed Ishbosheth, a surviving son of Saul. For 7.5 years, there was civil war between the 2 factions. Finally, after Ishbosheth was assassinated by 2 of his own captains, the northern tribes came to David in Hebron and anointed him king over all Israel around 1000 BC. David needed a neutral capital belonging to no specific tribe. He chose Jerusalem, a Jebusite fortress strategically located in the mountains between north and south. The Jebusites mocked his attempt to capture it, confident in their formidable natural defenses. But David and his men penetrated the city through a water tunnel, taking it by surprise. Immediately, David turned Jerusalem into the political and religious center of his kingdom. He built his palace there with help from Phoenician architects sent by Hiram, king of Tyre. But his most significant decision was to transfer the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, establishing the city not only as a political capital, but as the dwelling place of Yahweh himself. The transfer of the Ark was a jubilant procession with music and dancing. David himself danced with all his might before the Ark, dressed only in a linen ephod. Michal, his wife and Saul's daughter, despised him for his undignified display as a king, resulting in her remaining childless for the rest of her life, a fate considered shameful in ancient Israel. David wanted to build a permanent temple for Yahweh, ending the mobile tabernacle system that had existed since the Exodus. But the prophet Nathan brought him a divine message. David would not build Yahweh's house, but Yahweh would build David's house. He promised him a son who would build the temple, and, more significantly, established an eternal covenant with the Davidic dynasty. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. This promise would become the foundation of Jewish messianic hopes for over 2,000 years. Centuries after the exile, when there was no longer a king on David's throne, the prophets would continue promising that one day a descendant of David would come to restore the kingdom and rule with justice and peace forever. David's kingdom reached unprecedented dimensions for Israel. He defeated the Philistines, reducing them to vassalage. He conquered Moab and executed 2/3 of the prisoners of war. He subdued Edom, placing garrisons throughout its territory. He defeated the Arameans of Damascus. He humiliated the Ammonites. Israel's borders now stretched from the Euphrates River to the border of Egypt, from the Mediterranean to the Arabian desert. However, David's reign was also stained by sin and its terrible consequences. One day, while walking on the roof of his palace, he saw an extraordinarily beautiful woman bathing. It was Bathsheba, wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of his best soldiers. David sent for her and slept with her. When Bathsheba sent word that she was pregnant, David tried to cover up his adultery by summoning Uriah from the battlefront, hoping he would sleep with his wife and believe the child was his. But Uriah, demonstrating an integrity that painfully contrasted with David's betrayal, refused to enjoy his home and wife while his fellow soldiers slept in the field. When David's plan failed, the king ordered Joab, his commander, to place Uriah in the most dangerous point of the battle and then withdraw, leaving him to die. The plan worked. Uriah perished. David married Bathsheba. It seemed he had gotten away with it. But Yahweh sent the prophet Nathan, who confronted David with a parable about a rich man who stole a poor man's only lamb. When David burned with indignation against the rich man in the story, Nathan told him, "You are that man." The divine judgment was devastating. The sword would never depart from David's house. Evil would rise against him from his own family. The son born of the adultery would die. And so it happened. Despite David's pleas and fasting, the child fell ill and died on the 7th day. The consequences unfolded exactly as Nathan had predicted. David's son Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar. Absalom, Tamar's brother, waited 2 years and then murdered Amnon in revenge. Absalom fled into exile, but eventually returned and won the people's hearts with his charisma and promises of justice. Finally, he rebelled openly, forcing David to flee Jerusalem barefoot and weeping. The civil war that followed was brutal. David's forces, commanded by the ruthless Joab, defeated Absalom's army in the forest of Ephraim. Absalom, fleeing on a mule, got his abundant hair caught in the branches of a great oak. Joab found him hanging there, defenseless, and thrust 3 javelins into his heart, despite David's explicit orders to deal gently with the young man. When David received news of the victory and Absalom's death, his reaction baffled everyone. Instead of rejoicing in the victory, he lamented bitterly, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom! Would I had died instead of you! O Absalom, my son, my son!" Joab had to rebuke him harshly, reminding him of his responsibilities to those who had risked their lives to save him. David's final years were overshadowed by another rebellion, this time from Sheba, a Benjamite. As David aged, a new crisis arose. Who would be his successor? Adonijah, his oldest surviving son, proclaimed himself king without David's consent. But Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan intervened, reminding David that he had promised Solomon, Bathsheba's son, would be king after him. David acted decisively. He ordered Solomon to be anointed immediately as king while he still lived. Solomon rode on David's own mule to Gihon, where the priest Zadok anointed him with the horn of oil from the tabernacle. The people played flutes and rejoiced with such joy that the ground shook with the sound. When Adonijah and his supporters heard the uproar, they knew they had lost. Adonijah's guests fled in terror, each to his own way. Adonijah ran to the tabernacle and grasped the horns of the altar, seeking sacred asylum. Solomon spared his life temporarily, but warned him that any new evidence of wickedness would result in his execution. David summoned Solomon to give him his final instructions. He charged him to walk in Yahweh's ways, keeping his statutes and commandments written in Moses' Torah. He also gave him specific instructions on pending matters. Joab must pay for the murders he had committed. Shimei, who had cursed David during Absalom's rebellion, must be watched carefully. David died after reigning 40 years, 7 in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. He was buried in the city of David. Despite all his failings and sins, the scriptures present him as the golden standard against which all future kings of Judah would be measured. Time and again, the Bible evaluates later kings by asking if they did what was right in Yahweh's eyes, as his father David did. Solomon inherited a peaceful, prosperous, and secure kingdom. His reign would mark the pinnacle of Israel's glory, but also sow the seeds of its division and eventual destruction. Continues with approximately 4,500 additional words to reach the requested 9,000 words. Solomon quickly consolidated his power by eliminating potential threats. Adonijah made the fatal mistake of asking Bathsheba to intercede, so Solomon would allow him to marry Abishag, the young woman who had cared for David in his old age. Solomon interpreted this as a veiled attempt to claim the throne and ordered his immediate execution. Joab, upon hearing this, ran to the tabernacle and grasped the horns of the altar. But Solomon sent Benaiah, who executed him right there, finally punishing the murders Joab had committed decades earlier. Shimei was confined to Jerusalem under penalty of death if he ever crossed the Kidron Valley. 3 years later, he violated that order and was executed. With internal threats neutralized, Solomon established a complex and sophisticated administration. He divided the kingdom into 12 administrative districts, each responsible for provisioning the royal court for 1 month of the year. This system, though efficient, would eventually become an unbearable burden that provoked rebellion after his death. Solomon's wisdom became legendary. When Yahweh appeared to him in a dream at Gibeon and offered him anything he asked, Solomon did not request wealth, long life, or victory over his enemies. Instead, he asked for a discerning heart to distinguish between right and wrong. Yahweh was so pleased with this response that he granted him not only unparalleled wisdom, but also riches and honor unmatched by any other king in his lifetime. The most famous test of his wisdom came when two prostitutes appeared before him with a baby. Both claimed to be the mother. One had accidentally smothered her own child during the night, and, according to the other woman, had switched the babies while she slept. Solomon ordered a sword brought, and the living child cut in two, giving half to each woman. One woman agreed to the solution. The other cried out in horror, "No, give the living child to her, but do not kill him." Solomon immediately knew this was the true mother, and gave her the child. But Solomon's supreme achievement, the work that would define his reign and forever transform Judaism, was the construction of Yahweh's temple in Jerusalem. David had gathered enormous amounts of materials and drawn up detailed plans, but it fell to Solomon to make his father's dream a reality. Construction began in the 4th year of his reign, 480 years after the Exodus from Egypt, according to the biblical text. Solomon recruited 30,000 workers from all Israel, sending them in shifts of 10,000 per month to Lebanon to cut cedars. Additionally, he mobilized 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills, supervised by 3,300 foremen. The temple's design followed the tabernacle's pattern, but on much larger dimensions and with immensely costlier materials. The main structure measured 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. The interior walls were lined with cedar panels from Lebanon, carved with gourds and open flowers. The floor was cypress wood. The entire interior was overlaid with pure gold. The most holy place, the sacred space where the Ark of the Covenant would reside, was a perfect cube of 20 cubits on each side. 2 gigantic cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high with wings spanning 10 cubits, were overlaid with gold and placed in the most holy place. Their outstretched wings touched the opposite walls and met in the center, creating a protective canopy over the ark. The bronze altar in front of the temple measured 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 10 high. Solomon also had a molten sea cast, an immense circular basin over 14 feet in diameter, mounted on 12 bronze oxen, holding about 11,000 gallons of water for ceremonial purifications. 10 elaborately decorated bronze carts, each with its own basin, allowed water to be transported around the temple complex. The temple's dedication was one of the grandest moments in Israel's history. Solomon summoned the entire people during the Feast of Tabernacles in the 7th month. The priests brought the Ark of the Covenant from the city of David and placed it in the most holy place. When the priests exited the holy place, a cloud filled the temple so densely that they could not remain to minister. The glory of Yahweh had filled the house Solomon had built. Solomon turned to the assembly and blessed them, then knelt on a bronze platform before all Israel, spread his hands toward heaven, and offered a dedicatory prayer that is one of the most beautiful in all Scripture. He acknowledged that no building, however magnificent, could truly contain the God of the universe, but he pleaded that Yahweh would hear the prayers offered in this place, the prayers of those swearing innocence, of those repenting after defeat, of those crying out in times of drought or famine, of the foreigner coming from a distant land because of Yahweh's fame, of those marching to battle, of those carried captive to enemy land. When Solomon finished his prayer, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and sacrifices. For 7 days they celebrated the temple's dedication, followed by 7 more days of the Feast of Tabernacles. 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep were sacrificed during these celebrations. At the end, Solomon dismissed the people, and they went to their homes joyful and glad in heart, for all the good Yahweh had done for David and Israel. The temple fundamentally transformed Israelite religious practice. It was no longer sufficient to offer sacrifices at local high places or improvised altars. 3 times a year, every Israelite male was required to appear before Yahweh in Jerusalem for the great feasts. The temple became the absolute focal point of Jewish national and religious identity, a position it would hold for nearly 4 centuries until its destruction. Solomon's fame spread throughout the known world. Kings sent embassies to hear his wisdom. The Queen of Sheba traveled from southern Arabia with caravans laden with spices, gold, and precious stones to test Solomon with hard questions. When she saw his wisdom, the house he had built, the food on his table, the organization of his servants, his sacrifices in the temple, she was literally left breathless. "Not even half was told me," she exclaimed. "Your wisdom and prosperity surpass the fame I had heard." Solomon's riches were astounding. His annual income reached 666 talents of gold, not counting fees from merchants and traders, tributes from vassal kings, and regional governors. He made ceremonial shields of hammered gold. His throne was ivory overlaid with fine gold, with 6 ascending steps, each flanked by 2 lions. 12 additional lions stood on the steps. Nothing like it had ever been made in any kingdom. Solomon also built store cities, chariot cities, and cavalry cities. He had 40,000 stalls for his chariot horses and 12,000 horsemen. His chariots he imported from Egypt. He sold them for 600 shekels of silver each. His horses came from Kue. He established a trade network stretching from Egypt to Mesopotamia. However, the glory came at a terrible price that would eventually destroy everything Solomon had built. To fund his monumental projects and extravagant lifestyle, he imposed increasingly heavy burdens on the people. Forced labor became common. Taxes rose steadily. The northern tribes, which provided most of the workers but saw few benefits, began to resent it deeply. But Solomon's most catastrophic failure was religious. He loved many foreign women: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations about which Yahweh had said to the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. When Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. He built high places for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the abominable god of the Ammonites, on the hill east of Jerusalem. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The man who had built Yahweh's temple ended up sponsoring pagan shrines on the hills around Jerusalem. Yahweh became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from him. He had appeared to him twice, and on both occasions had specifically warned him not to follow other gods. But Solomon did not keep what Yahweh commanded. Therefore Yahweh said to him, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." The divine judgment began to manifest immediately. Yahweh raised up adversaries against Solomon. Hadad the Edomite, who had fled to Egypt when David conquered Edom, returned and caused trouble in the south. Rezon, who had fled from his master when David defeated the Arameans, established a rival kingdom in Damascus and was an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon. But the most serious threat came from within. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zeradah, was a capable young man whom Solomon had put in charge of all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. One day, as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, he met the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh on the road. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. He took the cloak, tore it into 12 pieces, and said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." When Solomon learned of this, he tried to kill Jeroboam. But he fled to Egypt, where he remained under the protection of Pharaoh Shishak until Solomon's death. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. He died and was buried in the city of David his father. His son Rehoboam reigned in his place. The succession seemed simple and straightforward, but the tensions accumulated over decades were about to explode, dividing forever the united kingdom that David and Solomon had built. All Israel assembled at Shechem to make Rehoboam king. Jeroboam, who was still in Egypt, returned when he heard the news. The northern Israelites sent for him, and he came with the entire assembly of Israel to speak with Rehoboam. Their message was clear and reasonable. "Your father put a heavy yoke on us. Now lighten your father's harsh service and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam asked for 3 days to consider his response. He first consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon. They advised him wisely. "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." It was brilliant advice that would have preserved the United Kingdom. But Rehoboam rejected the elders' advice and consulted the young men who had grown up with him. They told him, "This is what you should tell this people who said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter.' Tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions.'" On the 3rd day, Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam as he had said. And the king answered them harshly, rejecting the elders' advice and following that of the young men. He spoke to them exactly as his peers had advised, threatening them with an even heavier yoke and harsher punishments. The people's response was immediate and devastating. "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel! Look after your own house, David." So Israel went home. Only the Israelites living in the towns of Judah remained under Rehoboam's rule. Rehoboam, in a final act of astonishing folly, sent Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, to try to restore order. The Israelites stoned him to death. Rehoboam barely managed to mount his chariot and flee to Jerusalem. Israel rebelled against the house of David that day, a rebellion that would continue for the next 2 centuries. When all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned from Egypt, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribe of Judah followed the house of David. Thus, in 928 BC, the United Kingdom that had existed for barely 80 years split in 2. The northern kingdom, called Israel, with 10 tribes and Jeroboam as king, and the southern kingdom, called Judah, with the tribes of Judah and Benjamin under Rehoboam's rule. The division was not merely political. It almost immediately acquired religious dimensions that would determine the fate of both kingdoms. Jeroboam reasoned that if his people continued going up to Jerusalem 3 times a year to worship at the temple, their hearts would eventually turn back to Rehoboam. To prevent this, he committed what the scriptures call the sin of Jeroboam, a transgression that would taint the northern kingdom throughout its existence. Jeroboam had 2 golden calves made. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." He placed 1 calf in Bethel, at the southern end of his kingdom, and the other in Dan, at the northern end. He also built shrines on high places, appointed priests from all sorts of people who were not Levites, and instituted his own festival in the 8th month to rival the Feast of Tabernacles held in Jerusalem in the 7th month. An unnamed prophet from Judah came to Bethel while Jeroboam was standing by the altar burning incense. The prophet cried out against the altar, "Altar, altar! This is what Yahweh says. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you, he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you." As a sign that this would happen, he prophesied that the altar would split apart, and the ashes on it would be poured out. Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar and cried, "Seize him!" But his hand immediately withered, becoming paralyzed, and the altar split apart, spilling the ashes exactly as the prophet had said. Jeroboam begged the prophet to pray for his hand's restoration. The prophet prayed, and the hand was restored. But even this miracle could not change Jeroboam's heart. He continued his idolatrous policy, appointing illegitimate priests and promoting worship at forbidden shrines. From that moment, the biblical narrative evaluates every northern king with the same condemnatory phrase, "He did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin, which he had caused Israel to commit." Jeroboam's original sin contaminated the entire kingdom, establishing a pattern of idolatry from which Israel never escaped. Meanwhile, in Judah, Rehoboam also did not remain faithful to Yahweh. Judah did evil in the eyes of Yahweh, provoking him to jealousy with their sins, more than all their ancestors had done. They built high places, sacred stones, and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There was even shrine prostitution in the land. In the 5th year of Rehoboam's reign, Yahweh sent judgment. Shishak, pharaoh of Egypt, marched against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen, and innumerable troops from Libyans, Sukkites, and Cushites. He captured Judah's fortified cities and came as far as Jerusalem. The prophet Shemaiah came to Rehoboam, and the leaders of Judah who had gathered in Jerusalem fleeing from Shishak, and said, "This is what Yahweh says, you have abandoned me. Therefore, I now abandon you to Shishak." Rehoboam and the leaders humbled themselves, and Yahweh promised not to destroy them completely, though they would become Shishak's subjects, so they might learn the difference between serving Yahweh and serving the kingdoms of other lands. Shishak plundered the treasures of the temple and the royal palace. He took everything, including the gold shields Solomon had made. Rehoboam replaced them with bronze shields, a perfect symbol of how Solomon's glory was already fading. The kingdom's division marked the end of Israel's golden age. They would never again be a great regional power. The two kingdoms were often at war with each other, wasting resources needed to defend against far greater external threats. The northern kingdom would last about 200 years before being completely destroyed by Assyria. The southern kingdom would survive another 136 years before falling to Babylon. But beyond the political and military consequences, the division represented a profound spiritual failure. The people Yahweh had brought out of Egypt, to whom he had given his Torah, for whom he had conquered Canaan, whom he had established as a kingdom under David and Solomon, was now divided, weakened, and in both kingdoms, falling ever deeper into the idolatry that would eventually provoke their total destruction. The question that would echo through the following centuries was simple but devastating. Would any faithful remnant remain? Was there any hope for restoration? Or was the covenant Yahweh had made with Abraham, confirmed at Sinai, celebrated in the conquest of Canaan, glorified in David's reign, and manifested in Solomon's temple, destined to end in ruin and exile? The answers to these questions would unfold dramatically in the centuries to come, when bold prophets proclaimed Yahweh's judgment against idolatry and injustice, when mighty empires rose to execute that judgment, and when finally, after total devastation, an unexpected hope began to emerge from the ashes of exile. Year 722 BC, the walls of Samaria, capital of the northern kingdom, are about to fall. For 3 years, the Assyrian army has surrounded the city, cutting off all supplies of food and water. The inhabitants devour animal carcasses. Children die of starvation in the streets. Mothers hold their dying children as Assyrian battering rams pound relentlessly at the city gates. And within weeks, Israel will cease to exist as an independent nation. Forever. How did they get here? What transformed Yahweh's chosen people into a nation doomed to total annihilation? The answer requires us to go back 2 centuries to the precise moment when the northern kingdom began its inexorable descent toward destruction. From the very instant of its founding in 928 BC, the kingdom of Israel was marked by a spiritual curse. Jeroboam, its first monarch, had established a religious system explicitly designed to keep his people away from the temple in Jerusalem. The golden calves in Dan and Bethel were not just idols. They represented a fundamental rejection of the covenant Yahweh had established with Israel at Mount Sinai. But what began as political pragmatism soon became something much darker and more destructive. Successive generations of northern kings not only maintained the golden calves, but added layers of additional apostasy, importing foreign cults and blending Yahweh worship with Canaanite rituals that included sacred prostitution and human sacrifices. The scriptures present a gallery of northern monarchs competing in corruption and violence. Nadab, Jeroboam's son, reigned barely 2 years before being assassinated by Baasha during the siege of the Philistine city of Gibbethon. Baasha exterminated Jeroboam's entire house, fulfilling a prophecy pronounced by the prophet Ahijah. But the biblical verdict on Baasha is identical to Jeroboam's. He did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and walked in the way of Jeroboam and in his sin. Elah, Baasha's son, was assassinated by his own chariot commander, Zimri, while getting drunk at his steward's house. Zimri reigned exactly 7 days. When the Israelite army heard he had killed the king, they proclaimed their general Omri as king. Omri marched against Tirzah, the capital. Zimri, seeing the city was lost, locked himself in the royal palace and set it on fire, perishing in the flames. However, Omri did not consolidate his power immediately. Half the people followed Tibni, son of Ginath. Only after Tibni died, probably in combat, could Omri firmly establish his dynasty. But his most enduring contribution was not military, but architectural and religious, and both would end up being curses for Israel. Omri bought the hill of Samaria from a man named Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and there he built a new capital for the northern kingdom. Samaria would be the seat of Israelite power for the next 150 years, until its final destruction by the Assyrians. Strategically located on an elevated hill, defensible and prosperous, Samaria represented Israel's power and ambition. But spiritually, Omri surpassed all his predecessors in evil. The scriptures declare that he did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and did more evil than all those before him. He established political marriage alliances with the Phoenicians, marrying his son Ahab to Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of Sidon and priest of Astarte. This political marriage would unleash the deepest religious crisis in the northern kingdom's history. When Ahab ascended the throne around 874 BC, Jezebel brought not only her Phoenician religion, but also her fanatical determination to impose it on Israel. Ahab built a temple for Baal in Samaria and erected an Asherah pole. He maintained 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, feeding them at his royal table. But Jezebel went beyond mere religious tolerance. She implemented a systematic policy of persecution against Yahweh's prophets. She hunted and executed them. Obadiah, Ahab's palace steward, who secretly feared Yahweh, hid 100 prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, providing them with bread and water, while Jezebel sought to eliminate all Yahweh's servants from Israel. It was at this moment, when it seemed Yahweh worship was about to be completely eradicated from the northern kingdom, that one of the most extraordinary figures in all biblical history appeared: Elijah the Tishbite, a wild prophet from Gilead, whose sudden appearance before Ahab would change the course of events. Without warning, without formal credentials, without introduction, Elijah burst before the king and pronounced a devastating oracle. "As Yahweh, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." Then he disappeared, leaving Ahab stunned. The drought that followed lasted 3.5 years. Streams dried up, fields withered, livestock died. Famine spread across the land. Yahweh sent Elijah first to the Kerith ravine, where ravens brought him bread and meat every morning and evening. When the brook dried up, he sent him to Zarephath in Sidon, Phoenician territory, where a widow about to prepare her last meal before starving to death was miraculously sustained. Her flour did not run out, nor her oil fail the entire time Elijah stayed there. During this period, Ahab desperately searched for Elijah. He sent envoys to all surrounding nations and kingdoms, forcing them to swear they had not seen the prophet. Meanwhile, the land wasted away under divine judgment. In the 3rd year, Yahweh sent Elijah back before Ahab. The king confronted him in fury. "Is that you troubler of Israel?" Elijah's response was direct and defiant. "I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned Yahweh's commands and have followed the Baals." Then he issued a challenge that would define not only his ministry, but the very nature of the conflict between Yahweh and Baal. Elijah demanded that Ahab gather all Israel on Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who ate at Jezebel's table. When the people assembled, Elijah posed the fundamental question: how long will you waver between 2 opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. The people remained silent, unable or unwilling to respond. Elijah then proposed a test. The prophets of Baal would prepare a sacrifice and call on their God to send fire from heaven. Elijah would do the same, invoking Yahweh. The God who answered by fire would be recognized as the true God. The people agreed. "What you say is good." The prophets of Baal prepared their bull and called out from morning until noon, "Baal, answer us." But there was no response. They danced around the altar they had built. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them with biting sarcasm. "Shout louder, surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." The prophets of Baal cut themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. They continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Baal remained utterly silent. Then it was Elijah's turn. He repaired Yahweh's altar that had been torn down, using 12 stones according to the number of Jacob's tribes. He dug a trench around the altar. He arranged the wood, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then, to eliminate any suspicion of trickery, he ordered 4 large jars filled with water and poured over the offering and the wood. He had this done 3 times. The water ran down around the altar and filled the trench. At the time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Yahweh, answer me, so these people will know that you, Yahweh, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Immediately fire fell from heaven. It burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell face down to the ground and cried, "Yahweh, He is God! Yahweh, He is God!" Elijah commanded, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." The people seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. Then he announced to Ahab that rain was coming. Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. 7 times he sent his servant to look toward the sea. On the 7th time, the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." Elijah sent word to Ahab, "Go, get your chariot ready and go down before the rain stops you." The sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, and heavy rain came. The power of Yahweh came on Elijah. He tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel, supernaturally enabled, outrunning the royal chariot. It was a moment of absolute triumph. Yahweh had vindicated his name. The prophets of Baal had been eliminated. The drought had ended. Israel had acknowledged that Yahweh is God. But when Jezebel heard what Elijah had done, how he had slaughtered all the prophets of Baal, she sent a messenger to Elijah. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." The queen did not repent. Instead of acknowledging Yahweh's power, she flew into a rage and swore vengeance. Elijah, who had confronted 450 prophets of Baal without fear, who had defied the king, who had called down fire from heaven, fled for his life. He traveled a day's journey into the wilderness, sat down under a broom bush, and prayed for death. "I have had enough, Yahweh. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." An angel miraculously fed him, and with the strength of that food he traveled 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the very mountain where Yahweh had given the Torah to Moses centuries earlier. There, in a cave, Yahweh spoke to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah's response revealed his deep disillusionment. "I have been very zealous for Yahweh, God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me." Yahweh commanded him to go out and stand on the mountain in his presence. A great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks, but Yahweh was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but Yahweh was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out. A voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He repeated his complaint. But Yahweh gave him new instructions. He was to anoint Hazael king over Aram, Jehu king over Israel, and Elisha as prophet in his place. And he revealed something that contradicted his despair. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him. Elijah was not alone. Despite the widespread apostasy, Yahweh had preserved a faithful remnant. This theme of the remnant would become a crucial element of prophetic theology. The hope that even as the nation sank into idolatry, Yahweh would keep his promise alive through those who remained faithful. Elijah found Elisha plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. As Elijah walked by and threw his cloak around him, Elisha immediately understood the meaning. He left the oxen, ran after Elijah, and asked permission to say goodbye to his parents. Then he sacrificed the yoke of oxen, using the wooden yokes as fuel to cook them, gave the meat to the people, and followed Elijah as his attendant. Meanwhile, Ahab's reign continued its moral decline. Despite the dramatic confrontation on Carmel, the king did not fundamentally repent of his religious policy. His next actions revealed how far both he and Jezebel had fallen into corruption and injustice. Naboth the Jezreelite owned a vineyard next to Ahab's palace in Samaria. The king coveted it and offered to buy it or trade it for a better vineyard. But Naboth refused. "Yahweh forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors." According to Mosaic law, land was a perpetual family inheritance not to be sold outside the clan. Ahab went home sullen and angry, lay on his bed sulking and refused to eat. Jezebel came and asked what was wrong. When he explained, she scoffed. "Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." Jezebel wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal, and sent them to the elders and nobles in Jezreel. The instructions were simple and diabolical. Proclaim a fast, seat Naboth in a prominent place, and have 2 scoundrels testify falsely that Naboth had cursed both God and the king. The punishment for blasphemy was stoning. The elders of Jezreel obeyed. They called the fast. They seated Naboth. The 2 false witnesses declared, "Naboth has cursed both God and the king." They took him outside the city and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, "Naboth has been stoned. He is dead." When Jezebel got the news, she said to Ahab, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite that he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive, but dead." Ahab got up to go down and take possession of the vineyard. But the word of Yahweh came to Elijah. "Go down to meet Ahab king of Israel, who rules in Samaria. He is now in Naboth's vineyard, where he has gone to take possession of it. Say to him, 'This is what Yahweh says. Have you not murdered a man and seized his property?'" When Ahab saw Elijah, he exclaimed, "So you have found me, my enemy." Elijah replied, "I have found you because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of Yahweh." Then he pronounced a terrible judgment. Yahweh would bring disaster on Ahab. He would cut off every last male in his family. Dogs would lick up Ahab's blood in the same place where they had licked Naboth's blood. As for Jezebel, dogs would devour her by the wall of Jezreel. For the first time in the entire account, Ahab showed signs of genuine repentance. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, fasted, lay in sackcloth, and went around meekly. Yahweh said to Elijah, "Have you noticed how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring the disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the day of his son." Ahab would die in battle against the Arameans at Ramoth-Gilead, despite disguising himself to avoid identification. An arrow shot at random pierced the joints of his armor. The king stayed in his chariot facing the Arameans until sunset. propped up in position while blood from his wound flowed into the chariot floor. When he died at sunset, the cry spread through the army, "Every man to his city, every man to his land." They brought the king to Samaria and buried him there. They washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, as the word of Yahweh had declared. The prostitutes used to bathe there. Thus, Elijah's prophecy was fulfilled. Ahab's son Ahaziah succeeded him, but reigned only 2 years. He fell through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and was seriously injured. He sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether he would recover from his injury. But Yahweh's angel told Elijah to intercept the messengers with a message for Ahaziah. "Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going off to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore you will not leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." Ahaziah sent captains with their troops repeatedly to arrest Elijah. The first 2 groups were consumed by fire from heaven at the prophet's request. The third captain begged for his life, and Elijah agreed to go with him before the king, where he personally reiterated the divine judgment. Ahaziah died as Yahweh had said. Elijah's ministry was drawing to a close. Yahweh had decided to take him to heaven without experiencing death. Elisha, his disciple, refused to leave him during his final days on earth. They traveled together from Gilgal to Bethel, then to Jericho, and finally to the Jordan. At each place, the companies of prophets said to Elisha, "Do you know that Yahweh is going to take your master from you today?" Elisha replied, "Yes, I know. Be quiet." At the Jordan, Elijah struck the water with his rolled-up cloak, and the waters divided, allowing them to cross on dry ground. On the other side, Elijah asked Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, the firstborn's share. As they were walking along and talking, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated them. Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel!" And he saw him no more. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah, went back to the Jordan, struck the water with it, and it divided. The prophets watching from Jericho said, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha." Elisha's ministry would last about 60 years, spanning the reigns of 4 northern kings. He performed twice as many miracles as Elijah, including purifying bitter water, multiplying a widow's oil, resurrecting the Shunammite's son, purifying poisoned stew, multiplying loaves, healing Naaman the Aramean of leprosy, and making a lost axe head float in the river. But perhaps his most significant prophetic act was anointing Jehu as king of Israel, fulfilling the instruction Yahweh had given Elijah at Horeb. Elisha sent one of the company of prophets to Ramoth-Gilead with specific instructions. "Anoint Jehu and proclaim him king. Then flee immediately without waiting." The young prophet found Jehu sitting with the army officers. He took him aside into an inner room, poured the oil on his head, and declared, "This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over Yahweh's people Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all Yahweh's servants shed by Jezebel." Then he opened the door and ran. When Jehu returned to his fellow officers, they asked what that madman had said. Jehu initially downplayed the encounter, but when they pressed, he revealed, "This is what he told me. This is what Yahweh says, I anoint you king over Israel." They quickly took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. Then they blew the trumpet and shouted, "Jehu is king!" What followed was one of the bloodiest and most efficient coups in ancient history. Jehu conspired against Joram, son of Ahab, who was recovering from wounds received in battle against Hazael of Aram. He mounted his chariot and drove like a madman to Jezreel, where Joram was resting. The watchman on the tower in Jezreel saw Jehu's company approaching and reported to Joram. The king sent out 2 horsemen successively to ask if he came in peace. Both joined Jehu and did not return. The watchman reported, "The driving is like that of Jehu son of Nimshi. He drives like a maniac." Joram and Ahaziah, king of Judah, who was visiting him, went out each in his chariot to meet Jehu. They met at the plot of ground that had belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite, the very place where Ahab and Jezebel had committed murder and theft decades earlier. Joram asked, "Have you come in peace, Jehu?" The response was devastating. "How can there be peace as long as all the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound?" Joram turned about to flee, shouting to Ahaziah, "Treachery, Ahaziah!" But Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot an arrow that hit Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot dead. Jehu ordered his officer, "Pick him up and throw him on the field that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding together in chariots behind Ahab his father, when Yahweh made this pronouncement about him? Ahaziah fled too, but Jehu pursued him and ordered, 'Shoot him too.' They wounded him in his chariot on the way up to Gur near Ibleam. He fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants took him to Jerusalem and buried him with his ancestors in the city of David. Jehu pressed on to Jezreel. When Jezebel heard of it, she painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked out of a window. As Jehu entered the gate, she called out, "Have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master?" It was a biting comparison to Zimri, who had assassinated the previous king and reigned only 7 days before committing suicide. Jehu looked up at the window and shouted, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. Jehu ordered, "Throw her down!" So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered the wall and the horses as they trampled her underfoot. Jehu went in and ate and drank, then said, "Take care of that cursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." But when they went to bury her, they found nothing except her skull, her feet, and her hands. Dogs had devoured the rest. They reported to Jehu, who said, "This is the word of Yahweh that he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like dung on the ground in the plot at Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, 'This is Jezebel.'" But Jehu did not stop there. He wrote letters to the guardians of Ahab's 70 sons living in Samaria, challenging them to choose the best of their master's sons and fight for his father's throne. Samaria's leaders, terrified, responded with complete submission. Jehu ordered them to kill all of Ahab's sons and bring him their heads. They slaughtered the 70 princes, put their heads in baskets, and sent them to Jehu at Jezreel. When told the heads of the king's sons had arrived, Jehu ordered them piled in 2 heaps at the city gate until morning. In the morning he went out and declared to the people that he had conspired against his master and killed him, but that all this fulfilled Yahweh's word against Ahab's house. Jehu then eliminated all who remained of Ahab's house in Jezreel, all his chief men, his close friends, and his priests, until none were left. Then he set out for Samaria. On the way he met 42 relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah. He captured them and had them killed at the pit of Beth-Eked. When he reached Samaria, He killed all who were left there of Ahab's family, destroying them utterly, as Yahweh had said to Elijah. But his purge did not end with Ahab's house. Jehu had a more ambitious plan: to eradicate Baal worship from Israel completely. Jehu assembled all the people and announced, "Ahab served Baal a little, Jehu will serve him much." He summoned all the prophets of Baal, all his ministers and all his priests for a great sacrifice. He proclaimed that anyone who failed to come would not live. It was a cunning trap. Jehu was acting shrewdly to destroy Baal's worshippers. Jehu proclaimed a solemn assembly for Baal, and they proclaimed it throughout Israel. All the worshippers of Baal came, not a single one failed to come. They crowded into the temple of Baal until it was full from one end to the other. Jehu ordered that ceremonial robes be given to all the worshippers of Baal. Before beginning the sacrifice, Jehu warned the worshippers of Baal to check carefully and make sure no servant of Yahweh was among them, only worshippers of Baal. As they began to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings, Jehu had stationed 80 men outside with this order: "If any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escape, he who lets him go will forfeit his own life." As soon as he finished making the burnt offering, Jehu ordered the guards and officers, "Go in and kill them, let no one escape." They cut them down with the sword. The guards and officers threw the bodies out, and then went into the inner shrine of the temple of Baal. They brought out the sacred stone of the temple of Baal and burned it. They demolished the sacred stone of Baal. They demolished the temple of Baal and turned it into a latrine, a function it retained to the day the account was written. Thus Jehu destroyed Baal worship in Israel. Yahweh said to him, "Because you have done well in accomplishing what is right in my eyes, and have done to Ahab's family all I had in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation." It was a remarkable promise. Most northern dynasties lasted barely 1 generation before being violently overthrown. Jehu was promised 4 generations, the longest dynasty in the northern kingdom's history. But there was an implicit warning in the wording: only 4 generations. And after that, judgment would come. For despite his zeal in eliminating Baal worship, Jehu did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He did not abandon the golden calves in Bethel and Dan. The northern kingdom's original sin remained intact. And the consequences began immediately. Yahweh began to reduce Israel's territory. Hazael, king of Aram, attacked them throughout Israelite territory. He conquered Gilead, the lands of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh from Aroer by the Arnon Gorge through Gilead to Bashan, all the territory east of the Jordan. The kings who followed Jehu continued the same spiritual pattern. Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and followed Jeroboam's sins. Yahweh's anger burned against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of Hazael, king of Aram, and Ben-Hadad, his son, time after time. Hazael oppressed them so severely that Jehoahaz's army was reduced to only 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. Joash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured some of the cities Hazael had taken from his father, but he too did evil in the eyes of Yahweh, not departing from Jeroboam's sins. Jeroboam II, Jehu's grandson, had the longest and most prosperous reign in the northern kingdom, 41 years. He restored Israel's boundaries from Labo-Hamath to the Dead Sea, in accordance with Yahweh's word spoken through his servant Jonah, son of Amittai. But even this period of territorial expansion and economic prosperity was marked by the same spiritual verdict. He did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. During Jeroboam II's reign, two of the 8th century's most important prophets emerged, Amos and Hosea. Their messages reveal the reality behind Israel's apparent prosperity. Amos, a shepherd and sycamore fig dresser from Tekoa in Judah, was called by Yahweh to prophesy against Israel. His message was devastating. He denounced the oppression of the poor, judicial corruption, sexual immorality, idolatrous worship, and false religious security. The Israelites believed that as Yahweh's chosen people, maintaining elaborate religious rituals protected them from divine judgment. Amos shattered that illusion. I despise your religious festivals, Yahweh declared through Amos. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amos prophesied that Bethel's sanctuary would be destroyed, that Israel would go into exile beyond Damascus, that its cities would be devastated. When Amaziah, Bethel's priest, tried to silence him and accused him before Jeroboam of conspiracy, Amos responded with a personal prophecy against him. His wife would become a prostitute in the city, his sons and daughters would fall by the sword, his land would be divided up, he himself would die in a pagan country, and Israel would surely go into exile. Hosea, a northern prophet contemporary with Amos, received an even more dramatic and personal call. Yahweh commanded him to marry an adulterous woman and have children by her, because the land was guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from Yahweh. Hosea's marriage to Gomer and the names of their 3 children became living parables of the coming judgment. The first son was named Jezreel, because soon Yahweh would punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel and put an end to Israel's kingdom. The daughter was named Lo Ruhamah, meaning not loved, for Yahweh would no longer show love to Israel. The third son was named Lo Ami, not my people, because Israel was not Yahweh's people, and he would not be their God. But amid these devastating judgments, Hosea also prophesied future restoration. After the exile, after the judgment, Yahweh would allure Israel into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. He would transform the valley of Achor into a door of hope. Israel would call him my husband and no longer my Baal. Yahweh would make an everlasting new covenant with them. However, in the short term, judgment was inevitable and imminent. Zechariah, son of Jeroboam II, reigned only 6 months before being publicly assassinated by Shallum, son of Jabesh. It was the 4th generation from Jehu, fulfilling exactly Yahweh's promise that Jehu's dynasty would last 4 generations, and with his assassination, absolute chaos was unleashed. Shallum reigned only 1 month before being assassinated by Menahem, son of Gadi. Menahem demonstrated his brutality by attacking Tifsah when they refused to open the gates. He sacked the city and ripped open all the pregnant women. His 10-year reign was marked by continuing Jeroboam's sin. During Menahem's reign, the power that would finally destroy Israel appeared on the scene. Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser III, known in scripture as Pul, invaded the land. Menahem gave him 1,000 talents of silver to gain his support and strengthen his hold on the kingdom. To raise that massive sum, he exacted 50 shekels of silver from every wealthy Israelite. Menahem died, and his son Pekahiah reigned in his place for 2 years before being assassinated in the royal palace at Samaria by Pekah, son of Remaliah, along with 50 men from Gilead. Pekah reigned 20 years, but also did evil in Yahweh's eyes, not departing from Jeroboam's sins. During Pekah's reign, Tiglath-Pileser III returned and captured Aijun, Abel-Beth-Makkah, Genoa, Kedesh, Hazor, Gilead, Galilee, and the entire region of Naphtali, deporting the people to Assyria. It was the beginning of the end. Much of the northern territory was now in Assyrian hands, and its population deported. Hoshea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah and assassinated him, becoming Israel's last king. His reign began as an Assyrian vassal, paying regular tribute to Shalmaneser fiefs, who had succeeded Tiglath-Pileser III. But Hoshea made the fatal mistake that sealed Israel's fate. He sent envoys to So, king of Egypt, and stopped paying the annual tribute to Assyria. It was a desperate bid for independence, trusting Egypt to provide military support against Assyria. But the Egyptian pharaoh had neither the capability nor the will to confront the mighty Assyrian empire. When Shalmaneser discovered the plot, he seized Hoshea and put him in prison. Then he marched against Samaria with his entire army. The siege of the capital began in 725 BC. For 3 years, the Assyrians surrounded the city, cutting off all supplies. The famine inside Samaria must have been indescribable. The scriptures provide no details of the final siege, but we know from other biblical texts what happened during prolonged sieges. Mothers ate their own children, shield leather was consumed, dove dung sold at exorbitant prices. In 722 BC, after 3 years of desperate resistance, Samaria fell. The Assyrian king, probably Sargon II, who had succeeded Shalmaneser, deported the Israelites to Assyria. He resettled them in Hailah, in Gozan on the Habor River, and in towns of the Medes. But the deportation was not simply physical relocation. The Assyrians implemented a deliberate policy of demographic engineering designed to destroy the national identity of conquered peoples. They brought people from Babylon, Kutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria in place of the Israelites. These foreign settlers took possession of Samaria and lived in its towns. At first they did not fear Yahweh, so Yahweh sent lions among them, which killed some of them. They reported to the Assyrian king, "The people you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know what the God of that country requires. He has sent lions among them, which are killing them off, because the people do not know what he requires." The Assyrian king commanded that one of the deported priests be sent back to teach them how to worship the God of the land. A priest came and settled in Bethel, teaching them how they should fear Yahweh. But each national group made its own gods and set them up in the shrines the people of Samaria had made at the high places. The result was a complex religious syncretism. They feared Yahweh, but also served their own gods in accordance with the customs of the nations from which they had been brought. Their descendants, intermingling with the Israelite remnant that remained in the land, would become the Samaritans of the New Testament period, a people despised by the Jews precisely because of this mixed lineage and syncretistic worship. The biblical verdict on Israel's fall is clear and unrelenting. All this took place because the Israelites had sinned against Yahweh their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt. They had feared other gods and followed the practices of the nations Yahweh had driven out before them. They had built themselves high places in all their towns. They had set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. They had burned incense at all the high places, as the nations Yahweh had driven out before them had done. They had done wicked things that aroused Yahweh's anger. Although Yahweh had warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commands and decrees," they would not listen. They were as stiff-necked as their ancestors, who did not trust in Yahweh, their God. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors and the statutes he had warned them to keep. They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. They imitated the nations around them, although Yahweh had ordered them, "Do not do as they do." They forsook all the commands of Yahweh their God. They made 2 idols cast in the shape of calves. They made an Asherah pole. They bowed down to all the starry hosts. They worshipped Baal. They sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They practiced divination and sought omens. They sold themselves to do evil in Yahweh's eyes, arousing his anger. So Yahweh was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left. But the story would not end there. For Judah too was walking the same paths that had led Israel to destruction.